Socialism versus capitalism. We got a lot to talk about today, America. You're on the road. Thank you for joining us once again on the road. For reviews, opinions, and discussions, I'm Bruce.
And I'm Rasan. And again, thank you for joining us here. And remember, we want to hear from you, so feel free to hit us up. We're on the web at joinusontheroad.com. You can also find us on YouTube and for our video. And for our audio, we are streaming on just about every streaming service out there. So we're on Anchor, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Radio Public, Spotify, and Breaker. So and Anchor FM. So feel free to hit us up via any of those outlets. Also, you can comment on the website and on social media at The Road Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. So again, let's jump into it.
We're looking at capitalism versus socialism, or socialism versus capitalism.
The heavyweight bout
Which is
of
it,
the century.
Man? They're in the ring right now, and they're slugging it out.
Yeah. And you got a bunch of people on either side of the table who are, purporting their opinion on the subject. So before we really get into it, let's kind of look at the definition of these terms, because I think it's important.
And let me just say this real quick, because I think when you already do this, I think it's really important. We're not sitting here trying to say, okay, one or the other right now. This is a review. And from looking at some of the facts, opinions can be formed and
Absolutely.
We can discuss it.
Yeah.
So take a look at those definitions.
Yeah, so if we look at the definition, so let's look at capitalism. The big bad businessman, right? The big bad wolf of Wall Street. So capitalism in common usage means an economic system in which all or most of the means of production are privately owned and operated. All right, and the investment of capital and the production, distribution, and prices of commodities are determined in a free market mainly, rather than by the state. Okay, so that's you have that private ownership aspect, which is very important in kind of the market kind of dictating the way the ebb and flow of things.
And the idea is profit. Everything is operated for the benefit of profit.
Yeah, and the idea behind that is that by that will kind of encourage people to go out and build new enterprises and try to supply demands and find cheaper or more efficient ways to meet those demands. So that's kind of a broad, very quick look at capitalism. Now we look at socialism, and socialism most generally, and if you look at the just straight socialism, it refers to state ownership of common property or state ownership of the means of production. All right, so like a purely socialist state would be one in which the state owns and operates the means of production. All right, so I think we know that most societies now kind of combine forms of socialism with other forms of government, such as capitalism. And so that's kind of the main idea behind socialism. Now we have the modern form of this democratic socialism, which I think tries to take the focus off of the things being more state run and tries to take away some of the authoritarian aspects of it, and puts a lot of those decisions more towards the democratic process. And of course, there's there's many layers to the onion of socialism and the onion of capitalism. But this is just kind of a quick little Spark Notes version for those who might not be fully informed.
I think it's important, but then we need to also understand something about the United States of America while we're talking about this whole idea of socialism and capitalism. And I know a lot of people want to look at America as being just strictly a capitalist country. That's all it was about. It's capitalism. But in all honesty, the republic is that's what this is. This republic it it is a capitalist nation by way of the fact that you can start a business, invest in that business, see it grow, and you can profit from that business. But you have to understand, by the same token, that it also has a touch of socialism.
Absolutely.
Anytime you have a social program, that you've moved from capitalism to socialism at that point in time. So any country that is going to operate and have any kind of success is not going to be strictly capitalist or strictly socialist, such as America. Look, welfare, social program, Medicare, social program. When you look at food stamps,
U.S. Post Office,
social, So we have
socialist program
because basically the government runs it.
It's a service that is funded and provided by the government,
which probably needs to privatize, but that's another topic. So in truth, America is just not a capitalist or capitalistic country, but it's also a country that has social properties to it as well.
I think that's a good point that you just made. The fact that when you look at most governments, they're not fully one or the other, and you see where a lot of times when a country will lean more towards like a socialist state, where a lot of the shortcomings of being purely socialist kind of come into play, and so I think that it's important for there to be kind of a balance. I think that might be the sweet spot, is if there's more of a balance between the two. And I think really at the end of the day, when the smoke clears on this issue, that's probably where we're going to land, is somewhere in between the two. So I think that the question is about how far are we going to be leaning towards one side or the other? Because I don't see us becoming, purely, a straight socialist state, or a even, the democratic socialism that's, really is being pushed now. Which I mean, when you look at democratic socialism, it's not really. It's mainly it's socialism. It's just they just kind of changed the wording around of it a little bit, but I don't see us really leaning all the way toward socialism. I don't see us becoming a purely capitalist society either. But I think again, the question is going to be how far to each side are we going to be leaning, and to me, that's what remains to be seen. But let's talk about some of the discussion surrounding this topic. There's been a lot of heated debate regarding this. I know we've both been paying attention to what's going on.
It's been a lot. A lot of people. The thing about it is this: I realize that each side is going to try to villainize the other side. I understand that, but many are trying to point out the successful socialist countries, proving that socialism works. But if you really look at it, there is no successful straight up socialist country. It just isn't. Most countries that tend to thrive are not just socialist countries, but they combine socialism with a touch of good old-fashioned capitalism, because they recognize the fact that you can't keep putting out without bringing in. And that becomes a problem. So if you have X number of dollars in your coffers, and you keep finding more and more ways to spend that money, but you don't have enough money coming in to replace what's going out, sooner or later, you go bankrupt. Sooner or later, the economy takes a dive. So to say that we can have a straight up socialist country and that capitalism is bad and wicked, what you're doing is you're setting yourself up for a collapsed economic system, and inevitably another Venezuela, which is one of the countries that was being touted as being a wonderful example of socialism at work.
Yeah, if you look at the news reports on Venezuela from a few years ago, when they initially, embraced socialism as their political or their form of government versus the headlines on Venezuela now, it's like night and day. There's a very stark contrast. I mean, one of the things that I hear a lot of times is that socialism, typically, it usually works well in the beginning because there's money there. There's the level of the economy is to a point where you don't necessarily see the effects of the shortcomings of that system until the money starts running out, and inevitably, without some form of capitalism or some incentive for individuals to go out and generate revenue and generate the money that's going to go towards the programs that the government has to run, then you're going to have a shortfall. And when that happens, what's going to happen to these programs that the government is supposed to be funding? You're going to have shortfalls. So if the government, if the government is in charge of, ensuring that you receive proper health care, proper nutrition through your food supply, getting your mail on time, whatever the case may be, child care, all of that stuff, there's going to be shortfalls because there's not going to be money available to pay for it.
Exactly, and basically, unfortunately, Venezuela, is in a crisis right now, and it's actually getting worse at this point in time.
Starving,
and yet still you have a country that is rich in oil.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
this is an oil-rich country,
commodity rich.
Without a doubt.
I mean,
in fact,
the commodity.
95% of their revenues come from exports, oil exports. So you would think with that kind of revenue coming in, this socialism, this socialistic idea would work. Well, it really didn't work for very long. And we realized that what I believe it was Hugo Chavez, when he got in power in 1999, and of course he stayed in power until his death in 2013.
I thought, what was it supposed to be, 2 years, right?
Yeah, well, this was a guy that was going to.
If they didn't like what he was doing, if they didn't like how things were going, give me 2 years and I'll step out. I'll bow out gracefully, and
but see, that's another problem.
That's another problem with this socialism, with socialism as a form of government.
Well, the human factor.
Yeah.
Who gets power and then wants to let it go?
Exactly.
And if you don't believe that, look at America. Mm-hmm. You got senators and Congress people. Yeah. They've been in office for decades upon decades upon decades, and they're still fighting tooth and nail to continue to hold on to that seat. Some of them are well up there in years, but they're still fighting, trying to hold on to that seat. Yeah. Why? Because once you're in the position of power and authority, you don't want to give that up.
People don't want to give that up.
You want to maintain it.
You have to look at definitely the nature of man, for sure, and then also the nature of the types of people who want to be in these types of positions. Typically, they are more of the power-hungry types. So when you turn to a socialist state, the people who are in position to take those leadership roles within your government that have all that concentration of power, 9 times out of 10, they're going to have some tendencies which is going to cause them to want to hold on to that power by any means necessary. And they will use any and all means available to them typically to hold on to that power. And that's been exampled time and time again throughout history, most recently with Chavez and then his successor.
And the ideas that he had, which were socialist ideas, as far as being able to provide for the welfare of all the people. Everything comes from the government. Yeah. The government providing everything, and that's a fine ideal. The only problem of it is that when oil prices were higher. Mm-hmm. And it would make more profit from that. That was one thing. But when the oil prices began to drop, they didn't have as much money flowing in. And now, meanwhile, Chavez is saying he wants to be able to do more for the people. And so he started more and more programs when it came down to trying to take care of the people. And it got so bad because his plan backfired on him to the point where he had to put in price controls for food.
Yeah.
Now he had to step in to try to do something to offset the problem that he caused. Because the money that they needed was not coming in to support the programs that they had, that he was trying to carry on. So inevitably, what happens when you start putting price controls in there, now the business owners aren't making money.
Yeah.
And they begin to go out of business.
Yeah.
And eventually, when they got out of business, what happens now to the people? People don't have the money to be able to afford to buy the necessities of life.
Because whatever is left, is gone. It's going to be snatched up so quick.
Exactly.
And then not only are businesses going out, but then the ones who don't go out of business, they're going to 9 times out of 10 find a place that's going to be better suited for them. That's going to give them more favorable conditions.
Especially if it's a big company.
To make more money, because that's what businesses want to do. In order to sustain, you have to increase your revenue.
Also have the combination of the lack of currency to import the staples. Now, in other words, you don't have the money to import the basic essentials that your people need to survive.
Yeah.
I mean, flour, bread, the basic staples of life. Not even toilet paper. So now you have people who basically prices are inflated for a loaf of bread. Who could afford it?
Yeah.
They can't even afford toilet paper.
Yeah.
Why? Because it was a system, it was an idea and an ideal that he had, but in reality, it just didn't work. Because when you put it to practical application, when you put it into effect, it collapses on its own.
This was basically a you want to talk about a social experiment. This was a social experiment done on a country, and we see how it turned out now. And the only difference between this social experiment and one that you might see on YouTube or something where somebody does some sort of video on a social experiment is that this affected millions upon millions of people. And now flash forward to today, where you have almost 5,000 people a day, according to some sources, leaving Venezuela for other countries in order to just become, kind of a third-rate citizen in another country. You have doctors, educated doctors, who are leaving their profession order to become street vendors because they need to sustain themselves and their families. It's gotten to a place where, people are leaving because there's not enough food to eat. People are literally starving in a once flourishing country, which is now kind of a shell of itself, thanks to this failed social experiment. So
exactly.
This is just one example, but it's an important example because you got millions upon millions of people who are affected by this. They're
suffering
issue
right now.
And when you talk about these issues, you got to remember, this is what you don't know if this is going to work out or not. So you want to talk about, all right, America needs to be, democratic, socialist government. This is an experiment that you're playing on, what was it, 700 plus million people in this nation?
In America,
yeah, in America,
I think it's 350 million.
Sorry, 300. I try to make it double the size. We're not quite that crowded yet.
Trying to crowd us out, right?
Yeah, I think it's like 350 plus million people. But yeah, it's an experiment, and you don't know if it's going to work. And the thing about this is that the stakes are very high, because if it fails, we see how it goes when it fails.
Well, you have the economy collapse.
Yeah.
You have economic collapse, and prices go up, and but yet still, man, wages are dissipating because businesses are going under, and the ones that are big enough, they'll move out to another country, someplace else, where they can continue to maintain, their profit margins, and
Absolutely.
that's what it's going to boil down to. And what's left of people suffer. That the government has to step in, and they got to start figuring out how to ration things out.
Yeah.
Price freezing takes place. I remember back in the 70s when we had the oil crisis.
That was a big one.
Yeah, man.
I wasn't around for that, but
no,
I
that
know
was
it
long
big.
before you were born, man. But I remember back then when, there was no oil. And we were getting. I mean, the tankers were sitting out there, but there was no oil coming to us, and we're using our reserves. And suddenly, all of a sudden, guess what? Government stepped in and they said, "Okay, this is it. You're going to have to do alternate days for getting gasoline." So you looked at your tag or your I think it was your tag of the last digit or something like that. If it was odd or even, if it ended with an even number, you went on these days. If it was an odd number, you went on this days. So in other words, if you had an odd number and it was Tuesday and you were on fumes, but it wasn't your day, you didn't get gas.
You're walking.
Yeah, and that's what it, and plus it caused gas prices to go up as well. So now the government steps in to control the situation when there's a shortage. It's the same thing when it comes down to having a country trying to operate a system that basically will implode or collapse on itself. They try to look at Scandinavia, and they want to tout Scandinavia as being this wonderful example of a socialist society. Scandinavia is successful, but it's not successful because it is a socialist nation, but because they still incorporate the ideas of capitalism, business ownership in their system. If you eliminate that from the system, where's the incentive?
Where is it? There's none.